Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Friday, August 8th, 2025, episode 459. And I'm going to talk about a conversation I had once with an economics professor. So before I get to it, just wanted to make some comments on some news items that I saw. Number one, I tried to find it, but I saw an article. The title said, Reducing Dependence on China. Uh, and I guess in the past, I would have read a title like that and said, oh, okay, I guess we're too dependent. But then if you look at the bigger picture, we are threatening China, but we're threatening them before we are independent of China. So it makes it so comical, right? It's funny how ridiculous this country is, the government is, and all of the things that come out of the mouths of politicians. Um, in other words, we are really dependent on China for many things. Uh, Rare earths being one of them. And I probably said it before, you probably have already heard it, but just for the record, without rare earths, you can't make weapons. And so we're threatening war against China. At the same time, we need them in order to make the weapons that we are going to use against China if we ever have to go to war with them. So it's absolutely ridiculous. Why do that? Why threaten war? And so basically, and if you listen to some of the more experienced um, diplomatic people who have more experience in diplomatic affairs will basically tell you this is amateur hour, worse than amateur hour uh, from the Trump administration, right? The things that they say, the things that they do publicly is just embarrassing. It's just so god awful, humiliating. And this is the government that we voted for. And I'll tell you, I voted for Trump, but I voted for Trump because he promised that he would end the war. I should have known better, but and I've said this before, but he just got shot. People tried to kill him. Obviously, the people who don't want to end the wars are trying to get him. And so he should end the wars, right? And I figured he would go for broke that way, but clearly that's not Trump's in Trump's personality or wheelhouse. Also, I do think that something happened to him. Not maybe he was threatened, but you know, I don't know about that. But I think health-wise, I think something happened to him. He is more, shall I say, less like the person he was last summer. Just saying. I think that there's some kind of mental thing that happened. Maybe he had a minor stroke. I don't know. But he doesn't seem like the same kind of person that he was last summer. Maybe he's forgotten that there was an attempted assassination on him. So we get uranium from Russia, we get oil from Russia, and we're still doing all this threatening stuff against Russia. I just don't understand it, right? If you realize that you are so dependent on them, then you should, if and you want to aggress against them, then you have to be independent of them first. The fact that we are so dependent on China and Russia and that they haven't made it a bigger deal, like they haven't pointed out and said, oh, well, I guess we'll stop selling oil to you or we'll stop selling uranium to you, which they may, but we're not allowed to hear it in this country. And so most people in America are completely unaware of US dependence on Russia and China. And so they get to sit there and say, yeah, Trump showed them, they showed him who's boss, all this stupid, schoolyard bullying. Yeah, it just so silly. So if you're not going to threaten, right, you can't because you're too dependent on them, then you shut up, right? You don't say anything, you stay quiet, or you do something. Okay. And what are your choices? And I don't mean go to war. No, you innovate. Like, so for example, if we want to be uranium free, independent of Russian uranium, let's start using thorium, right? And so now you don't need it. And also that will hurt Russia, who relies on uranium mines for a certain amount of wealth. Developed a domestic oil industry, right? But you can't, of course, because of all the environmental protections that have been enacted because of big government. Or you can just simply look at prices and see what you can afford. So this takes me to the conversation I had with an economics professor. Uh, when I discovered Milton Friedman, that's all I would talk about in class for years, right? Because, and I knew nothing of Austrian economics, anarcho-capitalism, nothing, because I was totally steeped in the liberal graduate school subjectivity. And so it took me a while to come out of that shell, but my relentless questioning led me to basically sort of have one foot out the door. And then when I read Milton Friedman's Free to Choose, then that was it. I was gone. So when I was in my Milton Friedman phase and realizing that freedom does solve pretty much every problem I can think of, I was going nuts with it. And so I had this, when I did teach honors for a few semesters, I had one student who said that that I should have a conversation with his economics professor. And I wondered, what was going on. I was like, oh, I guess he's a free market guy too. And then one day when I was leaving my class, he came in to teach the next class. And so I guess I was in the, uh, you know, anyway, so we had an opportunity to cross paths. And so I introduced myself and I said that I was really crazy about the free market. And he was a little bit skeptical. He said, really? You like the free market? And I was like, okay, now I understand why that student told me I should talk to him, either to set me straight that the free market is not all it's cracked up to be, or to influence him in some other way. And so I said, I love the free market because it you know enables maximum freedom for everybody. And he said, oh, and just so you know, I do have an immature look about me. So although I think we were around the same age, he kind of looked at me like I was like some 30-year-old know nothing humanities guy, right? So anyway, I have that effect on people. I don't know. So he looked at me and he said, well, the problem of the free market is asymmetrical knowledge. And I and now I was kind of familiar with asymmetrical knowledge, like I know what it means, and I know that con artists rely on asymmetrical knowledge in order to run their cons, but I didn't see it so much as a problem in the free market. But nevertheless, he went on and he said, yeah, asymmetrical knowledge, the fact that some people have more information than others, that creates an unfair system, and so the free market can't work because some people have more information than others. It turns out he was department chair of the economics department, so I wasn't going to dispute him. But in my head, I was like, I don't know, what you're saying doesn't really seem to fly because I can already think of some ways to get around that problem. In other words, asymmetrical knowledge to me was not that big of a deal. Yeah, sure, it's an issue, but it's not something that cannot be overcome. Especially now that we have the internet and there's so much information online. And at least for the time being in the United States, we do have alternate sources of information. So we can have a debate online, as it were. So I got the feeling that he was kind of a pro-government professor, economics guy, and he believes that we need government to keep us safe. Um, and so there it was, right? So that was my conversation with him. I never spoke to him again after that. Um, and he probably thought I was such an idiot. But anyway, so let's talk about information asymmetry, okay? Or difference in information asymmetrical knowledge. Investopedia says, they gave a definition, but they have several takeaways. sort of bullet points for us to highlight. I'll just read four of them, well, all four of them. In certain transactions, sellers can take advantage of buyers due to asymmetric information, as the seller has more knowledge of the good being sold than the buyer. The reverse can also be true. In some instances, a buyer can benefit from having a greater amount of information than the seller. The third bullet point, asymmetric information can lead to market failures, such as inefficient market pricing and unfair economic results. And finally, it can also lead to instances of fraudulent behavior. Ah, there it is. So, because of asymmetric knowledge, because some people have less information than others, someone has to monitor all of this information so that we have less fraud and the vulnerable will not be taken advantage of. So basically, the government is going to help us with pricing, right? With this problem of asymmetric knowledge by ensuring that everyone has less information than the government, right? That basically is what they're going to say, right? So, oh, we'll protect you by denying you access to more information, by just giving you what we think you should know, and don't be curious beyond that, right? That's government censorship, right? That's how that works, right? And then regulation is put into place to not only reduce the information we have access to, but also to reduce the number of choices at our fingertips, right? And the reason is because government is not some kind of perfect entity. Government is just simply made up of people like you and me, but generally the worst type of people, people who want to control others, right? You may not have been like that when one gets a job with the government, but after a while, that does become your attitude. And I think it doesn't take that long. So either you're skeptical and try to find a way out of working for the government, or you stay there and you become like everybody else. Um, Also, in addition to the censorship, then they are going to decide what information everyone must know. And that's the propaganda aspect of government information, right? And rest assured that all of this information, this curated, centered, monitored, regulated information will benefit insiders and the politicians themselves. And this is pretty much what happened in the Soviet Union. In fact, that's Russia before they became free. When they were a communist country, they were called United Socialist Republics. You know, forget what the other S was, but USSR, right? That is the old Soviet Union. And so I was going to do an episode on how you had 400 people, estimates vary, but about 400 people controlling 10 million prices. Every time I think about that, it makes me laugh. It's impossible, right? And I was going to talk about how this small number of people try to figure out what the correct price was of 10 million items. And I thought about doing that, and then I was going to tie it to Trump's apparent belief that he can work the free market in such a way that everything will go well. People will buy the things that he wants them to buy. Producers will sell the things that he wants them to produce, and will live happily ever after, which is so naive. I believe it's probably the result of his experience as a corrupt real estate person, right? And so basically, you can't be a real estate mogul without being part of the system. You got to cozy up to certain politicians, have certain regulations, written to go your way, to screw other people out of their properties. And so this is why he was so frequently seen with politicians. So, but the obvious thing that we can observe is that all of this bullying that Trump does and engages in doesn't have the effects and results that he desires. More recently, the tool that he's using to manipulate everybody and to control everyone is the tariff, right? So he believes that other countries pay the tariff, which is so naive, maybe willfully ignorant, because I'm sure people in his administration tried to tell him, no, President, that's not how it works. The customer, the end buyer, the consumer is the one that has to pay the tariff. And so that's why Trump will say, oh, I'll punish anyone who changes their prices. It's just, come on. So he wants to use the tariff to influence business behavior. And I think he is under the impression that all of the regulations and restrictions which protected the real estate market, which meant that everyone had to do it in a certain way. And so if he can control the rule-making process, then he'll always get his way. So he believes that probably the global market is something like the real estate market, right? So my way or the highway, they don't have a choice. They have to do this or they have to do that. And this is wrong thinking, right? Because all the other countries in the world have choice, right? The laws and rules of the United States do not extend beyond the borders of the United States. And so when prices change, particularly because of taxes, they become signals. Those prices are signals to everybody else what to do, right? And so a long time ago, I said that the prices in the free market are the messaging system for everyone who participates in the market. So there might be asymmetric knowledge. You might not know as much as other people, but what you do know is the price, right? And you can start from there. So these price signals, right, or these signals and how they are read, right, how people read them will determine people's behavior. And so Trump doesn't see all of the consequences of his actions and his policies because he's not everybody, right? Other people who are not Trump, when they see the change in prices, they're going to change their behavior. They're going to do something different or do the same thing with different people, with different materials, right? So, in other words, changes in price are signals that people have to respond to. And depending on the person, whether they're in the manufacturing or the consumer side of things, they have to make adjustments. Okay. And everyone is going to make unique adjustments. Okay. So it's according to your situation, not according to Donald Trump's situation. And most recently, Trump made an announcement on finished gold products from Switzerland. Um, and a lot of people are saying, well, he only said that because he wants to get an easy win, right? For him, it's about looking good, being successful. And so he wants to say, yeah, I was actually able to do this. I think being called taco really bothers him, if he were to ever, be honest. So he wants to get a win, and he basically says, okay, so Switzerland cannot ship out finished uh, gold products. And depending on who you are here in the United States, your interpretation of that line leads to speculation, and then people lining up to make a trade or to conduct their affairs in a different way. And you might say, Switzerland, what does Switzerland have to do with us, right? So why would uh, you know, putting a tariff on finished gold products from Switzerland, how would that affect America as a whole? Oh, well, it does. Okay. Um, because it affects supply chain issues when it comes to gold. And gold is important because of its status as money, right? Commodity and money. And I've said a couple episodes ago that though what is it, 96% of all Bitcoin are owned by America, very little of the rest of the world is into the cryptos or particularly into Bitcoin, and that they are probably more into commodities such as gold. So once he increases the tariff there, well, then what it does is it creates a problem for everyone who deals with the gold. I listened to Vince Lanci talk about it, but I also listened to Monaco 64 this morning. He had a conversation with Eric Young. Both of them had different theories as to what was going on. It's interesting stuff, right? So there's an announcement, there's an effect. What's the fallout? Like, what are the ripple effects? Like throwing a stone. So the stone is the tariff on Switzerland, right? So what is the reaction and how far do the repercussions of that simple phrase, I'm going to put taxes on Switzerland, how does that affect everybody else? And so this is why I wanted to do prices in the Soviet Union, before the Iron Curtain came down, um, because it's a similar problem, right? And I remember reading a story where the government, the commissars, they changed the price of animal fur to be used that are used for coats and hats and whatnot. And so what they did was they increased the compensation that you would get for bringing in a fur by like 10 cents. Okay, very small amount. But what it did was, because prices changed so not frequently in the Soviet Union, it meant that someone could make a little bit extra by turning in more animal skins or fur or pelts or whatever you want to call them. So I think they might have been mink furs, right? So what happened as a result was people started hunting minks or animals, whatever was producing the fur, and they just started hunting them down to the point where you couldn't find any more. And then you had a sudden massive influx of furs into the collection sites, right? Because people wanted that little extra because the price of it had changed. And so they were going to make a little extra money for themselves. And of course, the problem was that so many new furs had come in that they had no place to store the furs. And so basically, all of the furs rotted. So there were very few animals left, and basically everything rotted. And so they couldn't use them anyway. And that was just one small effect of changing the price by 10 cents per fur. That's what happened. And you can imagine all those trappers, all those hunters, the next year they would have nothing, right? Because they hunted all of the animals, whatever it was. They hunted them all down. So there was very few left to reproduce, you see. And so there was that one story. There was another story I saw. Someone called it malicious compliance. So all these commissars, they would also impose quotas onto people. And the whaling industry at the time, when whaling was legal, they had quotas. They had to kill a certain number of whales per year. Otherwise, they will end up in the gulag, in the prisons over there, and disappear and probably die. So what happened was to comply with the unrealistic quotas, they killed everything in sight. And so they killed 180,000 whales to comply. And it meant that a lot of whales, the whale population was affected as a result. So the tie together is that Trump is kind of doing that as well, except it's not 400 people working for the price department. He's doing it by himself, right? It really does seem like he is setting up, intentionally or unintentionally, depending on who you're talking to, a nasty consequence. Something really horrible is going to happen. What is it? When will it happen? No one really knows, but the fact that he's talking in the way that he is, changing his mind on a dime, is setting people up for some kind of nasty consequence. Something is going to get something will break, something will get exposed, like commercial real estate loans. I read somewhere that a lot of people are just simply hiding all of their losses on commercial real estate, to try to keep that under wraps and hoping that Trump will bring the economy back, people go back to work, and they can start paying their loans. And banks obviously don't want to give up the game either, right? But maybe he forces that game into the light, and then everything starts to collapse as a result. Um, some people might say, oh, but we need the government, right? So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that we have asymmetric knowledge, right? We have a problem of asymmetry in the amount of, and different people know different amounts of things, which gives some people an advantage, which is not fair. And so most pro-government people will say, oh, we need a bureaucracy. We need government workers to watch over the market to make sure that no one is trying to take advantage of anyone else and try to ensure that everyone has the same amount of information. Um, yeah, this is simply not going to work. But at the same time, people will say, who will protect us from speculators, right? People who are, doing stuff on the stock market. If we don't know anything, then we're going to get screwed all of the time on the stock market while they make lots of money. Well, even situations like that can be resolved privately. If you can be paid for it, if you can somehow turn it into a business, and even some people just do it from their basement just for kicks. But you can have those independent contractors, independent monitors do a much, much better job than people in working for a bureaucracy. So in other words, we don't need the government to protect us from asymmetric knowledge. We have people who are more than willing to do it or be paid for a lot less to do that for us, right? And so they make up that gap for us. So the government will only preserve and double down on the asymmetric knowledge, right? Keeping us in the dark, because that ultimately is what the government's goal is, to control the flow of information, right? If they are the one protecting us from misinformation, they can also be the one who gives us the misinformation. Whereas independent uh, checkers, they only can make money if their checking is honest and accurate. So basically, this whole idea of Trump calling all of the shots is a dinosaur idea. It's an obsolete idea. We don't need it. We definitely don't need it. And it will end badly. These days, we need more information, sure, but we have more information, which makes us less reliant on official sources. Even myself, I know where to go, and if I don't have enough information, then I know where to look. So we don't really need the government now. We have the internet, and it's not just me against a seller or a buyer, right? It's mass participation in this information, right? So everyone is contributing. Wikipedia is kind of like that. Everyone's contributing, everyone is editing. And as long as you have a system where it is maintained, then it's really difficult for someone to only spread lies or one-sided information, right? So it's mass participation in information. So it's not just my personal body of knowledge must keep me safe. No, it's the information of everyone in society. Right. So everyone who has ever been interested in a product, well, they're going to read product reviews, and maybe after they purchase theirs, they're going to leave a product review. And so that missing information is going to be right, filled in, like you'll have it. And think about all of the things that we need information about: war, peace, product safety, development, new products, right? This makes doing business a lot more riskier, right? There's a lot more risk because, other people can take your idea and go even further. And so your business goes bankrupt, right? But see, the government uses that argument to justify subsidizing certain important, quote unquote, important businesses, right? Which then is not really a problem, right? Think about if we had honest money, then the amount of losses that a person would incur if their business failed would be a lot less, right? So it would be easier to start a business and the pain from having bankruptcy would be less in an honest society where the government leaves everyone alone. But things are really bad now because government will not leave us alone. So this means that even governments which threaten and bully have less ability to do so, right? And the reason why fewer and fewer countries are listening to the United States is because they have more information now. They can trade with someone else. They can get the stuff that they need from someone else, right? Because there is always a choice on the global stage, right? And this is what government officials always want to try to control. They want to tell you, you have no choice. You have to do this, right? And we're telling you the truth. Don't listen to all of these other sources of information. They're giving you bad information, right? And this is why more government officials, that's the line. That's what they begin to say more and more. But that's it. That's all I wanted to say about my conversation I had with an economics professor. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you next time.